Hi, how's it going? So before we begin, I just need to ask one thing. Who here used to play the clarinet in middle school? Yes! We are going to be best friends. You see, I too also used to play the clarinet in middle school. But I'll talk about that in a moment. So first off, my name is Chris Arcand. I work full-time on open source software for Red Hat, as Jonan said. I work remotely out of Minnesota in the Twin Cities. There's no engineering office there. I've worked remotely for almost 5 years now. It's been awesome. At Red Hat, I work on ManageIQ. So ManageIQ is an open source cloud management platform that powers the Red Hat CloudForms product downstream. So in a nutshell, it allows you to manage containers, virtual machines, networks, and storage all from a single platform. The code base is on GitHub. It's easy to find, and you can learn even more about it talking with me afterward or going to manageiq.org. So as always, thank you to Red Hat and the ManageIQ team for giving me the opportunity to come speak here with you guys, and thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. So this is what I do now. If you met me at some conference, you'll see I'm just another developer. I have my computer science degree. I've settled happily in a suburb outside of St. Paul with my wife and our 7-month-old son. I really love what I do. And I wake up every single day understanding that I'm an incredibly lucky and entitled individual who shouldn't take it at all for granted. So before software, yeah, I was doing something very different. I've been playing the clarinet since I was 9 years old, and growing up I had grand aspirations of becoming an orchestral clarinetist. And if you think this picture is super nerdy, I'd like to say two things. Number one, look around you, you're at a tech conference. Everyone looks pretty nerdy. And two, I have a whole lot more embarrassing pictures of me holding a clarinet. I'm just gonna take a moment, take that all in. I call this one back here the magazine shot. See it on a magazine cover? Yeah. Oops. So I originally wrote this talk for 40 minutes, and I found out a couple days ago I only have 25. So I'm going to be cutting things out a little bit. I got a whole lot of things I wish I could go over, but condense it. As far as my background goes, I'll just say that growing up, I got to study with some of the best teachers in my area and played in various youth symphonies and other extracurricular things. I was that band dude. After high school, I auditioned all over the northeastern United States and got accepted at a few fancy conservatories that wanted me to sell my soul and pay them $40,000 to $50,000 a year to go there. But in the end, I was lucky enough to not, in fact, sell my soul, lucky, and stay in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I grew up. Because there was a really unique opportunity there. One of the most talented and well-known clarinetists in the country happened to live in Minneapolis and play clarinet in the Minnesota Orchestra. Fantastic orchestra. I got accepted there on a pretty good scholarship, and I was only one of 2 undergraduates allowed in the studio. The rest of them were graduate students or master's students or doctoral of musical arts students. Yes, if you want to be a doctor of clarinet, that is a thing you can do. Not even kidding you. So I remember the first wind ensemble rehearsal I went to there, and after playing one piece with the group, I was absolutely terrified. These players were extremely good, and the music was really complex. And I used to play, I'm used to playing at this level, but not at the speed and quantity that this was. So I quickly learned my first lesson. I needed to learn how to be able to deal with looking at really complex looking music in a very short amount of time. Because you see, in high school and previously, you had all the time in the world to learn your music. You could basically just get it and show up at a rehearsal and fumble through it and kind of lean on your colleagues and the director to help you through things and all that. And the concert wasn't for like another 3 or 4 months, so who cares? No big deal. I'll get through it. At university and the professional world, you can't do that. You need to get every single note off the page in your first rehearsal. Scheduling time and space for 80 musicians plus some hotshot conductor isn't cheap. Neither is booking your accompanist to sit in a practice room with you to practice your recital music for endless hours in the day. So you need to concentrate on the expressive aspect of playing with a group and not scrambling to practice technical execution. So getting the new music that looked initially really complex was extremely daunting for me. And it fueled many feelings of really intense imposter syndrome. How do I even begin to look at all this ink on a page and bring it out in an instrument? Well, I soon learned how to do that. I'd take an overview of the piece. I'd look at it from beginning to end and say, hey, what sort of piece is this? What's the time period from? Maybe the style dictates that. The form and the structure. Is it a 4-movement symphony? Is it a short little duet? What's the tempo like? Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it both? If so, where does it change? Then I'd sing things to myself. I actually wouldn't even pick up my clarinet yet. I would sit there and just sing stuff off the page. If you can't sing it, you can't play it. It's kind of like what Elle was talking about earlier about, if you can't explain something simply to someone, you probably don't understand it. If you can't sing it, you can't bring it out in an instrument. So then I'd find phrases, circling specific ideas, practicing those areas individually, and then very slowly, under tempo, super, super slow, I'd slowly start putting it together and eventually be able to play the piece. And then looking back, I would always think, oh, it's actually not that hard. It's not a big deal. I figured it out. It's not as hard as I thought. The initial complexity that I saw looking at the piece of music isn't there anymore. So how does this relate to software? Well, seeing a new code base can be extremely daunting, right? You get a new client, you get a new job, whatever. You open up the code base in your text editor and you freak out and think, oh my gosh, all these moving parts, all this crappy code, all this good code, whatever. What am I going to do about this? How am I going to understand it? Well, eventually, as you all know, often you'll look back at that once daunting code base after a long period of time and think, oh yeah, even if it's still not super easy, I get it now. I can work with this. So for me, my music experience told me from the start that if I broke things down, didn't freak out, it was going to be totally fine. So one of the most memorable things my instructor ever told me that I always remember all the time is, playing the clarinet is easy. And while there's some obvious falsity in that statement, all right, playing the clarinet isn't exactly perfectly easy, there's also quite a lot of truth. I thought at first he was just being the figurative lead developer of my future who just didn't understand what it was like to be in my shoes anymore. But what he meant is that when you get down to it, playing the clarinet boils down to a small list of things that you see over and over and over again, regardless of skill level. It doesn't ever change. It's all the same in the end. You're used to using all of those same skills. So taking that into account, there are actually fewer pieces than you'd think that are just that ridiculously hard, where anyone, regardless of experience level, would just say, oh, that's just that hard. It's never going to feel any easier. It's just so, so hard. So complexity is on a relative scale. And there aren't many problems in programming where the code itself is so inherently complex that anyone, regardless of experience level, is just going to be like, all right, that's just that hard. It's always going to be that hard to you that you have right now. So what I'm saying is, don't let the initial complexity scare you from diving in, or don't freak out if something looks hard. It was important to me for music, and it's the same in programming. So looking back, I think I spent a third of my time at school concentrated on a single thing, and that is technique. There's a lot more to performing than just playing all the notes off the page. So going to school isn't just about always studying technique. But I struggled with that aspect at first, and I thought that it was just learning technique. Just get better at technique and you'll be fine, don't worry about it. But what I soon realized, it's not really about technique. It's about concentration. You need utmost concentration performing a piece of music with no technical mistakes and bringing the music off the page in a believable way to your audience. You need to be able to block every other thought from your brain, pouring your entire being into thinking about what you're playing. And it sounds really corny, right? Like, let the music take you away to a special magical place. But however you view it, it's actually what's required for technical excellence. And in software, this level of concentration we often call like being in the zone, right? Oh, the programmer's in the zone. They're distraction-free, they're concentrated, they're super productive, right? It's what we always want as programmers. There's always the, don't disturb the programmer when he or she has their headphones on because they're in the zone. You don't want to interrupt them. You don't want to interfere with that cheat, right? So there's a lot of writing and talks and all sorts of business about concentration, working deeply, right? So instead of sitting here talking about it, I'm going to plug a book. So I read a book very recently called Deep Work. It's by Cal Newport. It's a fantastic book. The subtitle for this book is Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. And in it, the author talks about deep work versus shallow work. So shallow work is doing low-demand tasks like checking your email, responding to emails or whatever, right? Anything with notifications and whatnot. It's these small, very repeatable tasks that don't take a lot of brain power, but might take up a lot of time in your day. He describes deep work as the ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task. So first he makes the case that any knowledge-based profession will reap all these huge benefits from doing this. In the second half of the book, he gives all these strategies and advice to actually achieve a regular habit of doing deep work. It's a really good book. I could babble about it for a while, but please, just go read it. It's great. So maintaining this concentration or working deeply is really exhausting, right? So related to intense concentration and deep work is the concept of balance to produce quality. So as you can imagine, musicians practice their music a lot, right? There was a colleague at school in a different studio. That person claimed to practice like 7 hours a day in the practice room just studying his or her own music. And that doesn't include stuff like 2.5 to 3 hours worth of wind ensemble or orchestra rehearsals that day. And then most people had to do another 1 or 2 hours worth of chamber music. So that is a ridiculous amount of playing in a day, right? So in contrast, my instructor advocated no more than a couple hours a day practicing, maybe creeping up towards 4 when you were crunching for auditions or whatever, but really no more than that. And why? Because concentrated work, when you're doing it right, is exhausting. And if you're not careful at some point, you're just mindlessly playing notes and not even really pushing yourself to be better. It's even detrimental. You perform like you practice. Practicing without concentration actually teaches you to perform without concentration. And I discovered the same problem going into software. Right as I hit the stage in my career where you'd call me an intermediate, I overworked myself a lot. I worked ridiculous hours and had a hard time decoupling my thoughts from work at the end of the day. And I wasn't as productive with my time while I was working that I could be, and my personal life suffered a lot. So this concept of balance extends itself outside of the confines of the hours in a day, too. It's about balancing yourself as a person and making time for things that you enjoy outside of programming or work. And as members of the Ruby community, you've probably heard all about this stuff from people like DHH over at Basecamp. Things like avoiding burnout and not working 60-hour weeks and not glorifying someone who says that they never have time for their kids. So I didn't have it all figured out when I started doing software, of course, and I don't even have it all figured out now. But coming from music, this notion of balance was already very natural to me. And as I was reading that deep workbook, I constantly thought, oh yeah, I know this. I already have experienced this before in a different way. The no practicing for more than 4 hours that my instructor taught me, that is literally the exact time that the author estimates in that book that anyone, regardless of skill level, just can't concentrate very deeply beyond that amount of time. So it's uncanny how many things I discovered through music that presented himself there. So my experience in music of how to make the most of my time and understanding the importance of being a well-rounded person made me a better programmer right from the start. So there's one more thing that I want to talk about, and that is hero worship, and attached to that, imposter syndrome. Throughout my years studying music, I got to meet a lot of really well-known, important people in the classical music world. I've studied and played side by side with some really monster players that you can now see in the National Symphony Orchestra in Washington, D.C. Someone plays on Broadway. Another guy lives in a Marine Corps band. They're all over the place now. And I got to work with internationally known conductors and composers, and people that I still can't actually believe gave me their time to listen to me play and teach me things. I have so many stories that I wish I could tell. But these musicians that you see, these are some of the DHHs and Aaron Pattersons and Chad Fowlers and Sandy Metzes of the orchestral clarinet world. Now, I can say I've gotten to know some prominent people in the Ruby world, and at Red Hat, especially working full-time on open source, I've worked with lots of names that everyone in this room has undoubtedly heard of. So I've been internally screaming at myself since the last slide, because I've purposely been setting humility aside and making myself sound so important and so awesome. But I'm actually trying to say the opposite. I'm a very normal person. I feel like an imposter right now, honestly, talking about it this way. But I have worked and gotten to know enough people from both music and software to authoritatively say that your heroes are normal people. All those people I just mentioned are normal people. Your heroes don't have some superpower that makes them super amazing. The clarinetists that I met and studied with all started somewhere, and it wasn't just sheer talent that got them where they are today. It was almost entirely hard work, a lot of sacrifice, and honestly, a little bit of sheer luck. There's a reason why the saying goes, practice makes perfect, and not talent makes perfect. Your heroes are not inherently better than you and understand things that you never will. Their knowledge is not a simple superset of your own. They don't know everything you do, just like you don't know everything that they do. They can actually learn from you. Your heroes have simply learned how to handle complexity, concentrate deeply, and balance themselves to create the quality work that you admire. And that's not to say that they have it figured out all perfectly, especially the balanced one. Everyone I talk to, everyone struggles with balance, right? Your priorities change, life changes. Balance is always an ongoing struggle for everyone. In the end, what I'm trying to say is that everyone here, including your heroes, are just people. They too deal with imposter syndrome and feeling inadequate. And for me, coming from music, where I got to study with some of my heroes, I feel like I internalized that very quickly. So I know I'm running out of time, and there's so much more to talk about that I can't possibly go over. I'm just going to wrap up, and I want to play one more piece for you. So I did finish my music degree. I taught my own studio of students for a few years, and I did decide to move on, and the rest of the story brings me here where I'm standing in front of you today. So the inevitable question that I know I'll get after this talk is, why? Why did you move on from music to go into software? So I looked at myself in the mirror and decided I wouldn't be able to keep the balance I need in my life while still attaining the career goals that I set for myself. There's more to life than just playing the clarinet, just like there's more to life than just programming. I knew I need to sacrifice more time and effort being a successful musician, whereas with software, something I enjoy almost as much, maintaining a healthy life balance doesn't require me to sacrifice that time, and I can spend it doing other things that I enjoy that aren't even related to music or programming, and spending time with my family. So although some people might say that maybe I wasted my time not going straight into what I ultimately made my career, I don't regret my time at all. The things that I learned make me a better programmer before I even got started. And the dirty secret, if you've been listening carefully, is that all these things aren't related to just music or aren't related to just programming. These things are related to life in general. Many of you have likely discovered these things for yourself from a different angle, coming from a different background. So really, these lessons didn't just make me a better programmer, they made me a better person. So I'm going to play one more piece. Quick show of hands. Does anyone know what a bandoneon is? Does anyone know?
It's a...
The Argentinian instrument.
Bam! Good job. Does anyone know what an accordion is? Yeah, there we go. So kudos to you. A bandoneon is like an accordion, but it sounds a little bit different. It's the instrument that brought about Argentinian tango music. And as the bandoneon is considered the tango instrument, the man you're seeing here that I have pictured playing a bandoneon is the tango composer. So this is Astor Piazzolla. He was a virtuosic bandoneon player and considered the world's foremost composer of tango music. He single-handedly invented the style Nuevo Tango, which is basically a mix of tango music, classical, and jazz. So I've been playing all these really purposely weird pieces for you here at Keep Ruby Weird. So now I'm going to play something that might feel a little more familiar on your ears. This is a Tango Etude by Piazzolla that he wrote for flute, and I'm just going to play it on the clarinet instead. Can't play flute. I also forgot to say, I really wanted to do this talk for a long time, kind of blending the two spheres of my life, and I haven't found the right venue for it, and I'm glad I did. So thank you all for listening so much. I really appreciate it. Bye.